Good evening. Exactly a month ago, we celebrated the fun festival of Purim, whose central character was a Jewess, Esther, who together with her cousin Mordechai saved the Jews from the gallows through fasts, prayers and personal activism. Esther had married Ahasuerus, the king of Persia. The king's edict had been simple and similar to similar edicts throughout history: kill the Jews, this time by hanging. The story relates how Esther faced two options: do something or walk away from the calamity about to befall her people. After all, secluded in the palace, she could continue to enjoy the fabulous comfort of her regal status. One sentence in the book of Esther is instructive. Mordechai admonishes Esther not to remain impassive now. And therein lies the challenges faced by the main characters of Purim and Passover. Hebrew scriptures characterizes Moses as the most humble of men. He was the advocate who stuttered. Having grown up in the regal comfort of Pharaoh's palace, abandoning Egypt as a fugitive, Moses could also have kept himself away from the dire misery and abject slavery which befell his people. He could have remained secluded in the tranquility of a stunning desert landscape, grazing his sheep. Just like Moses, Esther, centuries later, grasped the thorns of fate. In both cases, devitalized and petrified Jews craved for the inspiration to confront the reality of their brutal reality and for divine salvation. Moses and Esther stood the test of leadership by confronting evil eyeball to eyeball. For Moses, the confrontational negotiations with Pharaoh and leading the Jews from slavery to liberation were daunting. Purim and Passover teach us that looking the other way resolves nothing. The ostrich posture may be wonderfully comfortable for that bird, but treacherous for humans. When Moses visits Pharaoh carrying the seminal message, "Let my people go," Pharaoh repeatedly replies with a resounding no. Moses is nonetheless emboldened by a sense of fate, showing that personal commitment and undying faith can move an entrenched Pharaoh who is finally haunted and plagued by 10 divinely ordained plagues. A month ago, we celebrated the festival commemorating our reprieve from destruction at the hands of Persian fanatical bullies. Tomorrow evening, we celebrate our liberation from slavery and ultimate genocide at the hands of Egyptian fanatical bullies. The story of Passover obliges us to recall the fear, misery, and bondage of our co-religionists for two reasons: to heighten our own empathy for the downtrodden, and secondly, so that we do not forget that although our personal and collective safety hangs by a thread, our resolve is resolute. But, as the recent monstrous massacres in Toulouse prove, we must remain vigilant. With contemporary fanatical bullies threatening to decimate Israel and world Jewry in the space, and I quote, of 9 minutes, we had better believe those threats, for we have learned that when an enemy says we are coming to get you, it's no joke. The activism of Esther and Moses, both are exemplary and salutary and a lesson for all seasons. Publicly stating the obvious is shunned upon by the misguided concept of political correctness and misplaced human rights. Very simply, it seeks to deny us plain speaking, freedom of choice, and freedom of speech. Plain speech is correctly and adequately conditioned by the laws of libel, slander, and public decency, not by the rule of the mob and not at the whim of preachers of intolerance and violence. The West looks quite cowed and soft on bullies with a bias to harass the law-abiding. We are living at a time when human rights have been turned on its head and politicians and mainstream media indulge in political correctness. Hebrew scriptures and Hebrew prayers inspire us daily. Remember, you were slaves in Egypt. This should instill in us an awareness and sensitivity towards injustices globally and a refusal to shut up in the face of savagery. Passover is about doing, a commitment to a higher ideal. Slavery debases the essence of the human condition. Slaves are bought and sold against their will. Millions of fellow humans today are held in debt bondage. Domestic servants kept in captivity. Sex slaves, child soldiers, and forced marriage, to name but a handful. 126 million children around the world work in conditions harmful to their health and welfare. And yet, what has the UN done to eradicate slavery? What has the EU Commission done to eradicate slavery? Beyond repetitive, empty statements of intent, nothing. The slave trade flourishes with impunity. Slavery is underpinned by a refusal to accept that we are all born in His image, heirs to dignity, respect, happiness, and the right to personal, unhindered transformation. Passover speaks to us about the quality, equality, and dignity of all human life. The seminal lesson of Passover is that we move on one step at a time, no matter how dark the valley, no matter how rough and uncharted the road. For there has never been a tunnel so long which didn't ultimately emerge into a daylight, or a night so morbidly dark that didn't ultimately yield to the dawn. Passover nudges us to remember that there's a Creator who nourishes His creation and who is in vibrant communion with each. A Creator who exchanged our status of slaves to man to servants of God. The essence of Passover conveys the core of Jewish essence. As we recall our misery and helplessness as slaves by the symbolic foods we eat and the stories we tell. We dip parsley into salt water to remember the tears we shed in Egypt. We bring to the table acharoset, a doughy paste to simulate the cement which plagued us for 210 years. Matzot, tortas, the crispy wafers which substitute bread during Passover, is an evocative food substance. At the beginning of the festive meals, we say halachmania. This is the bread of our affliction, but paradoxically, also the bread of our freedom. We live in a crazy world. Every dawn brings a novel, nauseating twist to the twisting tale of the human species. But we believe in the promises made by our prophets, even as we are caught in the whirlpool of international relations where nothing makes sense, and double standards is the password to membership of the wretched United Nations. We believe, nay, we know, of the promised messianic relief and blissful governance leading to sincere world peace and prosperity for all mankind. And we await the Messiah, even as we are confused and frustrated by a world gone mad. The first days of Passover focus primarily on our first redemption, our liberation from Egypt. The closing days highlight the final redemption, the future era of divine goodness and perfection heralded by the coming of the Messiah. During the latter days of this festival, the prophecies of Isaiah take center stage. He foretold of world peace and the establishment of Jerusalem as the hub of hope, source of spiritual salvation, and the umbilical cord of timeless teachings for all mankind. As Isaiah preached, Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah, udvar Hashem mirushalayim. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. May we see a rebuilt Jerusalem. L'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim habenuyah. On behalf of the Jewish community, I wish all Christians a very peaceful Easter. To you all, ladies and gentlemen, of whatever faith or of none, thank you for listening. And to my co-religionists, Chag Sameach, a very happy festival. Shalom.